We will now call to order the Special Committee on Reducing Red Tape on Wednesday, January 29th at 8:37 a.m. On January 2025 at 8:37 a.m. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Spencer. Vice Chair Oldenburg.
Present.
Alderman Ryan.
Here.
Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Saunier.
Present.
Sheriff Velazquez.
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. I'm sorry. Is Alderwoman Clark Hubbard? Did she say aye? We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
President Green
President Green
is here as well.
Okay. We have
Thank you.
5 present.
All right, Madam Clerk, do we have minutes to approve from Monday yet? Are those?
Yes, we have minutes. They're in the drive.
All right, I will now entertain a motion for the approval of minutes for the meeting on Monday, January 27th, 2025. Would anybody like to move to approve those?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Spencer. Vice Chair Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderman Ryan.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Saunier.
Aye.
Chair Velazquez.
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. We have 5 aye votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we are here today to continue our discussion and review of Board Bill 14, sponsored by Alderman Aldridge. Madam Clerk, can you go ahead and just read the very brief summary description of this bill? And then we will pass it on to the Alderman.
Board Bill number 14, introduced by Alderman Rasheen Aldridge, an ordinance which amends Chapter 8 of the St. Louis Revised Codes to streamline food truck operations.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Alderman from the 14th, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. Board Bill 14 has been a long and coming piece of legislation. We started back in April of last year. This committee had heard the original iteration of my bill. And from there, I came together with various stakeholders, the Food Truck Association, the Restaurant Association, which the Restaurant Association supports the legislation, as well as the food truck. GSL helped convene a table with individuals with those, as well as Downtown Neighborhood Association, Central West, and various people from city departments, such as the Parks Department and the Mayor's Office, all kind of came together, worked on this legislation. So the goal of the Board Bill 14 is ultimately in the process of looking at red tape from last session, and then this session, noticed that food truck operators were having issue with operating in the city of St. Louis. We won't touch the licensees. I think that is also an issue, but today we're just talking about the operation. So food truck operators basically do not have various spots where they were able to vend, was very restricted from being able to vend and throughout the city. I think one special case that we've seen food trucks be successful vending is in Tower Grove Park on Saturdays. Tower Grove learned that Tower Grove Park is actually a private park, but the city maintenance it. So this bill would allow food truck operators to be able to operate in certain districts, as well as there would be a mobile food court along Market Street. We did address the city parks situation. We end up originally food trucks are not able to vend in city parks. So the Parks Department was at the table saying that they were able, that this is something that they felt was something that food trucks eventually could do in the future. We have some language around in the committee sub. There is an amendment to tweak that. I heard the concern from Alderwoman Keys, understanding that all parks are not the same park. So we will get to that amendment here soon, as well as originally in the chapter 8 of the food truck ordinance, there was a buffer of 300 feet that food trucks can be around restaurants. That got changed from 100 feet. I appreciate the Restaurant Association coming to the table, being willing to be comfortable with the 100 feet, as well as they cannot be outside of any brick and mortar. I think I want to make that clear because there's a lot of misinformation out there, is that food trucks can be able to park outside of a brick and mortar. Under the old ordinance, they couldn't. Under this, they cannot. We are changing the feet requirement, as well as giving them an opportunity to be able to park outside a brick and mortar if they get written consent from the actual operator or the actual brick and mortar. Madam Clerk, I do have a committee sub that I would like to bring back forward in front of the committee to bring up again those additional changes that we made from the original Board Bill 14.
Alderman, would you like us to make a motion to adopt committee substitute for Board Bill 14?
I would, Madam Clerk. Madam Chairwoman.
Is there a motion to adopt the committee substitute for Board Bill 14?
So moved.
May I ask for a point of clarification? I'm having trouble with my camera, my apologies, but can we discuss the amendment before adopting it?
Well, it's a
This is a-
committee substitute.
Yes, I'm sorry,
Alderwoman.
can we have a discussion on the committee substitute before a vote to adopt?
I'm gonna, just a quick clarification from the Alderman. This is the same committee substitute that we adopted.
Correct.
For
For the folks that were here Tuesday, this is the same committee substitute that we adopted that I went through. There's no changes from the committee substitute. So this is the same one from the last hearing.
So Alderwoman, we actually discussed this in detail on Monday.
Understood. If there could be a summary at least of what we're voting on, I think it would be helpful not only to the alderpersons who weren't present, myself included, but the general public who's watching, just so we have clarity on what we're voting on.
Sure, and we can do that, Alderman Aldridge, and if you want to also maybe resend Alderwoman Spencer, I believe you sent around a summary document with the changes.
Yes, I can do a summary. I just want to be clear for the public. This committee substitute was sent to all committee members last week. Like the chairwoman said, we actually talked about this piece of legislation Monday. All committee members, I don't think Alderwoman Spencer was present. We adopted it Monday. I talked about some of these changes, but I'll go back through the changes. I also just went over the changes, but I'll do it again. So in section 1, what we removed is we amended the vending district locations to citywide vending districts, which are now adjacent to districts F through L, which are commercial and industrial districts. We removed all the current districts that was in the bill that was like downtown, Merrimack district, and we just created a citywide district. We did keep in the WIF district. The WIF district is between the Arch and the courthouse, which is a district where the Arch works with individuals where they're able to sell popcorn and lemonade. So we did not want to touch that to be able to restrict kind of a contract within that. We also created a new section, which creates, again, a mobile food court along 1200 Market to 1320 Market Street. One of the concerns we heard from food truck operators, I know Byron is here from the Food Truck Association, maybe to be able to talk about it. There is a very slim sliver of area where food trucks can operate on Market. We know there's not many restaurants, especially for our city employees and folks that work at least on the Market side, maybe not closer to the Wash F side, but on the Market side. So this would be a mobile food truck or mobile food court where they'll be able to vend. Like I say, we created a new section that would allow vending in city parks. You will see an amendment that will be coming hopefully forward, but originally with this committee substitute, it allows mobile food truck vendors to operate in city parks on Fridays. The hours that they would be able to operate would be 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. or 4 p.m. to park curfew. There is also in the section, the city park will create a portal where they would have to sign up to be able to operate within that park and register 7 days in advance. The streets department would be the individuals that's now new in the bill that would be kind of the enforcement agency. They would be, which they are already the enforcement agency and they work with food trucks. They also will create, like I say, a portal so that when it comes to city parks, that people can be able to sign up and know exactly when and where they're going to be able to operate. There's also will be a comment and complaint section for residents to be able to make complaints or comments if they feel a certain food truck is not being community friendly. We changed the requirement in section 5 from 300 feet to 100 feet. That was a negotiation in the meetings that we had with the roundtable. I know Alderwoman Spencer, you was invited to those roundtable meetings as somebody who also have downtown. 100, we went from 300 feet to 100 feet, as well as requiring a map for vending zones and a comment portal again that the streets department would have to annually update the vending zone map so that vendors know exactly where they could be able to vend. That is the committee substitute. And I think there was a motion.
There was a motion, the Alderman.
I just had a few other questions, if that's possible, Madam.
Yes, if we could keep it brief because we have testimony and we have a short timeline this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies here. But I guess but some of the questions were from people who were unable to participate here this morning. The distance requirement is still 300, is that correct?
No, Alderwoman Spencer, if we adopt the committee substitute, the current ordinance is 300. We negotiated in those meetings that your office was invited to 100 feet.
Sure, and I appreciate that. As we discussed last night, Alderman, my new legislative aide who's been on staff for several months now has not been engaged in the process. So, the three of us were trying to work through some of these issues last night, as you're well aware. But considering the letters that we received this morning, I, share some serious concerns about that distance. The Cherokee Street District, in particular, pointing to the real need to see a 300 feet rule. I also guess my concern would be, our question would be whether the street department is holding the permits under this new legislation. I just am asking for a point of clarification on that.
Under chapter 8 already, the streets department hold the permit. We're not changing who holds the permit, Alderwoman.
Okay, so there's not any change from the Board of Public Service in this case.
BPS has nothing to do when it comes with the food trucks and the permit. The street, they get their permit and licensees from the license collector office, and then they have to get a fire suppression. They have to go to the health department to get their food and health inspection or licensees, and then they have to get something from the street department, which we found out that process of licensees is very also strenuous on food truck vendors, but we're not touching that process. And BPS doesn't have anything to do. I did get that email from your new LA, but BPS is not part of the process. It's the streets department.
Thank you. And as I appreciate that. One of the unresolved issues on my end as well that was pointed out was Soulard. We all as a board recently expanded their community improvement district, which is a sales tax. Would the sales tax that is in place for all brick and mortar and all establishments in Soulard apply to food trucks in the district while they're there?
They currently don't apply, or they currently do apply. I see Byron hand shaking. They currently do apply. We are not touching anything when it comes to the sales tax. This is all about the operations distance where they're able to operate. So, and if they already are paying that sales tax, that is not being changed in this legislation, Alderwoman.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to echo the concerns of the Cherokee District and other districts we've heard from. I apologize for having to miss the meeting on Monday, but as you know from our conversations last night with my legislative assistant, who's been on board for several months now, we just haven't felt like we've been able to resolve these issues. So I appreciate the opportunity to have some clarity here.
No problem, and I appreciate the conversation yesterday. I know since it's been filed, I know yesterday you said you weren't able to read this piece of legislation, but if there are some concerns that you have, I'm always willing to take concerns. And like I say, this was sent out last week. Always want to take those concerns. And if you have potential changes or amendment, always willing to work with you, Alderwoman.
Sure, no, I just hadn't, as I clarified last night, the committee sub, which was new, but of course I read the original piece, Alderman, but certainly because we're moving so quickly here right at the end of session, I just feel like for the last 4 months, I know many people in the community have felt like they have not been part of a constructive process over the last 4 months, myself included. And so I just, if you could share before the end of the meeting here, you mentioned support from GSL and the Restaurant Association. It would be so helpful to have those letters of support. I'm sure they're in the drive. I just haven't had the chance to read them. Thank you, Alderman.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I see we have questions from people who are not on the committee. I'm going to second the adoption of the committee substitute. I'm going to go a little bit out of order and honor a question from one of our colleagues about this, who's not on the committee. Alderman Browning, if you could please keep it brief.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to jump in here. I will keep it brief. I just wanted to echo some of the concerns from Alderwoman Spencer. I have several districts, commercial districts in my ward
We're
that
here for questions, and we'll have testimony. We have other alders here who are going to testify, so I would ask that if this is the question, keep it to a question. If not, we'll have room for testimony after.
Sure. I guess I'll just ask the sponsor if he would be willing to work with me as well, because I think it's important that I be looped in with the number of commercial districts in my ward.
Absolutely, Alderman. I know, I want to say Jim, I'm butchering, I think Alderman from the 10th know his name.
Mr. Dwight.
Yeah, he was from the Central West End. He was at the Monday meeting, but he's also been part of Dwyer. He's also been part of those roundtable conversations that's been going on for a year. But absolutely, Alderman, always willing to work with you. I know you have a lot of establishments in the Central West End, like I do downtown. So yes.
Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you. All right, well, we have adopted committee substitute for Board Bill 14. Alderman Aldridge, you continue to be recognized.
I don't know if y'all did a vote. Did y'all vote?
Oh, we didn't.
Point of order.
I'm sorry, I
We
apologize.
didn't vote.
Thank you, thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Spencer,
No.
Vice Chair Oldenburg,
No.
Alderman Ryan,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Aye. Alderwoman Keys,
No.
Alderwoman Sonier,
Aye.
Chair Velazquez,
Aye.
President Green,
Aye.
we have 5 aye votes, 3 no votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, the committee has adopted committee substitute for Board Bill 14. Alderman Aldridge, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have amendment number 1. This is the same amendment from Monday that we adopted with the committee substitute, which on page 1, line 11, it strikes out the word, or it strikes out section 8.1088.010, and it inserts, what we're doing is there's language that says that it should be adjacent to the zoning. I know this was one of the concerns we're talking to GSL and downtown. So what we're doing is it will say, shall mean the streets department shall mean that the streets that are adjacent to the zoning districts. So we're putting the word shall mean that the streets that are adjacent to the zoning districts, not to just say that it is adjacent to F or L. And that is amendment number 1. I would ask for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Amendment 1 to committee substitute to Board Bill 14?
So moved.
Second. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll? Or is there a call for
Call
previous
the
roll?
second.
I called the second.
Alderwoman Spencer, Vice Chair Oldenburg,
No.
Alderman Ryan.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Alderwoman Keys,
No.
Chair, Alderwoman Sonier,
Aye.
Chair Velazquez,
Aye.
President Green,
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer.
No,
You have your camera on, I can't see you.
I can't figure out, it's not working on my end. My apologies. That's why I didn't speak last time. There's a issue with my video not working. There we go.
Okay,
No.
your vote is aye.
My vote is no.
We have 8 yes votes and 3 no votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, we've adopted Amendment 1 to Committee Substitute Board Bill 14. Alderman Aldridge, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I will talk a little bit more in depth about this, but be brief, kind of we have the public. I do have another amendment. Alderwoman Keys, I think, brought up a concern around food trucks operating in parks and how, her park may not be necessarily best fit. And originally in the bill, what it said is that the Parks Department shall create a portal, which they said it would do for food, for mobile food vendors to reserve time slots. That time slot on Friday shall be from 11 to 2 p.m. or 4 p.m. to park curfew. We're striking that out, and we're inserting in the drive. It is hereby established that the mobile food vendors are authorized to operate on Fridays in city parks. The park department shall designate in which city parks mobile food vendors may operate, the times of operation of mobile food vendors in such designated city parks, and publicly posted such information on the city website. The Parks Department shall create a portal for mobile food vendors to reserve those slots. So trying to give some discretion for and a little bit more leeway for Parks Department to make sure that they are controlling the hours. They're talking with alders, understanding maybe when certain months are good for them to operate or certain months not for them to operate in certain parks. But this amendment is trying to address the concern that Alderwoman Keys had about kind of the openness of food trucks operating in city parks, which I think is good, but it would give more discretion to the Parks Department to make sure that it's a little tighter process around it. That's amendment number 2, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Aldridge. Is there a motion to adopt Amendment 2 to Committee Substitute Board Bill 14?
So moved.
Well, I had my hand up. I had a comment since my name was mentioned as being associated with this amendment.
Go ahead, Alderwoman.
My concern is that, and what I asked, and there was a refusal to really work with me on this thing. And what I really do want is for my ward to be excluded from this food truck issue. That is what I requested. I have Grand Center. I have the Locust Business District, Midtown Alley. I have a lot of restaurants that are truly struggling right now and some that are closing. I expressed that concern. It fell on deaf ears. And so this is not something that is working for the community that I represent. I made that very clear.
If I could just respond, all meetings are public. You go back Friday. I know Alderwoman Keys brought up the concern with the parks. I have not received the email far as wanting your ward excluded. We did have back and forth on not maybe having the hearing soon, but if you have an amendment or would like to have
it was expressed in a text message that I had with the sponsor on Monday evening, along with the concern that I was protesting that we were even having this meeting so quickly on the heels of having a meeting on Monday.
All right, so what we're going to do
there
here,
was an unwillingness.
We're here to
unwillingness to work with me on this.
Alderwoman Keys, I appreciate your protest here. We're here to amend, to add, adopt, or not adopt Amendment 2 in this moment. We're talking about this bill. We can discuss some of this stuff not in committee right now, but is there a motion to adopt Amendment 2 to Committee Substitute Board Bill 14?
Madam Chair, I just have a question about it.
Is there a motion to adopt? There was a motion to adopt.
You're not taking questions on the amendment before we adopt it? I just have a question of clarification, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I couldn't vote on an amendment without asking questions about it. The process, Alderman, that you outlined for the parks, the Parks Department has the authority. Is there a mechanism outlined if communities want, for example, not the parks not to include? So I'm thinking, for example, in Soulard, where you have the Soulard Market, you know, you also have another park very close by. And if the community wanted to, for example, make sure that there weren't food trucks there during specific times where they have, you know, events or other things, or in general, what is there a process outlined in the bill where community members can very clearly articulate and get the Parks Department or guarantee or have some process of petitioning, you know, so that it's not just up to the Parks Department, there's a clear and articulated process to be involved in that decision-making process?
Yeah, so again, section 2, letter M, is kind of the comment and complaint section, where residents would be able to make comments or complaints about if they want the food truck in a park, or if they do not. Originally, in the committee substitute we adopted, it was Friday slots from 10 to 4 to curfew. So instead of just making that a generic time, we wanted to also we added in more ability for community to have say on where if they want a food truck in the park or not, and just saying it has to be on Fridays during these times. But in section 2, there is a process in the portal that would be created from the streets department where they can make a comment or complaint about a food truck, or if they want a food truck in a certain park, or maybe on the month of April the 23rd, there'll be a festival. So there is that process.
Okay, so just for a point of clarification, the portal goes to the street department, but it's the Parks Department that decides which parks will allow vending?
The
Will there be
portal Go ahead.
So the portal belongs to the street department, and then but it's the Parks Department that decides which parks are going to allow vending?
So there'll be 2. So there'll be a portal for the streets department, and then the portal for parks department as well. The street department will have the portal to allow the comments and complaints on food trucks. The parks department, being able to allow them to vend in the park, will also create a portal, which both departments have already said it takes literally 30 to 60 minutes to create with tech, but they will have a portal for the park section to be able to operate within the park. And that's
Okay.
in the amendment that we're discussing. At the end of it says the Parks Department shall create a portal for mobile food vendor to reserve time slots.
So there'll be 2 portals for food trucks, one for Parks Department and one for Streets Department. Does this create more red tape? Or is this, I'm just, how do you,
Not in my opinion.
say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I was saying no, not in my opinion. If anything, we're setting up an operation where they actually can be able to vend in more areas than they were able to vend currently.
No, I guess I'm asking for the public. If so will there be a list of parks that allow vending and a list of parks that don't? I'm just trying to understand the process of the park situation, because I honestly remember Alderwoman Keys bringing this up, I guess 6 months ago. The idea of, you know, I think she signed on to be a co-sponsor specifically to ban her ward. So I just, I hear her concerns on that matter. I also have some concerns about parks, given, like I said, you know, we're banning them from the front of the Gateway Arch. I really think this is a good initiative. I just want to be very clear on that. The details are so important, and that's why I'm asking all these questions, Alderman.
Yeah, so we're not banning them from the arch. In the original section 8, they were already zoned out of the arch area. I'm not banning them anywhere. If anything, I'm trying to give them an opportunity to operate in more areas. The original bill that Alderwoman Keys sponsored actually had them vending everywhere, throughout every ward that originally was sponsored. We're trying to tailor it so that they are not vending in not in residential areas, but more in the commercial areas, still with the requirement of a foot distance.
So, but again, just on the park side, because I think this amendment is specific to parks, correct? So
Correct.
I want to keep my questions germane to that topic. But is there going to be so residents can log complaints to the street department, and the Parks Department through various portals. And then is there a list of parks that, so the public and vendors know which parks are allowing food trucks and which are not? And is that
Yes.
decision solely on there is going to be a list of parks that say yes and parks for no?
Correct.
And is that decision made by do we have that list of parks that are going to allow them and those that are not?
Parks already said they're committed to working on that, and they also said that they would be committed to talking with alders to figure out what parks are more accessible than other parks.
So these
Like-
are going to be decisions made between the Parks Department and the alderpersons?
It could be with the alder or the community as well, because there would be a portal for like comment and complaints. But just like we work with all departments, Alderwoman, if you have a concern of a certain park, I hope Commissioner Hagelman is always willing to work with alders to make sure that certain things meet their need or what's good or for their community.
I guess my concern is that it doesn't seem to have a super clear process of, say, for example, removing a park from the list. If it's sort of just based on, colloquial or, conversations between the alderpersons and various members of the community and the Parks Department, it doesn't seem like that's a clear process or criteria to me. And without that prepared list in advance, I just have some, very general questions about which parks are included, which parks are not included, and the criteria that would be used. And if you're saying it's conversations between a city department and the community, I know I've had some really, really arduous conversations with the Parks Department and community about barbed wire on around, pools and other things that have just taken years and years to resolve. So I have some concerns that process isn't clearly articulated. The list of parks that would allow vending, the proposed list of parks isn't prepared, and that there isn't a clear process. And we're asking members of the public to try to decide upon which portal between the street department, which we know clearly from the last snowstorm has some, issues with taking complaints and dealing with them, and the Parks Department, which I know is understaffed and underfunded, to try to, at some later date determine which parks and without a clear criteria. So that is my concern on the amendment and this issue. Not that I don't want food trucks in some parks, I very much do, but I think it needs to be tightened up a little bit and be very clear so there's a process that's articulated to the public that we can trust and rely on.
Thank you, Alderwoman
Agreed.
Spencer.
Don't work on it, Alderwoman.
Madam Clerk, I seconded that motion to adopt amendment number 2 to the committee substitute board bill 14. Can you please call the roll? Madam Clerk.
You're on mute, Madam Clerk.
Alderwoman Spencer,
No.
Vice Chair Oldenburg,
Nope.
Alderman Ryan,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Alderwoman Keys,
No.
Alderwoman Saunier,
Aye.
Chair Velazquez,
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
We have 5 aye votes, 3 no votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Alderman Aldridge, we have adopted amendment 2 to committee substitute of board bill 14. You may proceed.
Those are the amendments I have for board bill 14. If you want me to take questions, I know we have various members also from the public here to speak. So
I will take, well, let's go in order of, are there any additional questions from the committee before we move to public testimony?
Madam Chair, I would just request I would like to hear from the public again. I know there were some comments on Monday, but with the ability to ask questions once some of those concerns have been raised. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Agree with that, and I know Alderwoman Tyus has been on first, and maybe I'd like to hear from her as well.
Yeah, so Madam Clerk, I'm going to give let's give, I know we have Alderwoman Tyus and Alderman Browning if he's still on. Let's let them testify. I'm going to give them 3 minutes apiece.
Wow.
We're on a tight timeline today, so it's nothing personal, Alderwoman Tyus. We've got a lot of.
I take it personal.
Well, that's not a. I can't help how you.
Yeah, always up to me as the senior alderperson. I take it personal, but you can do that. But wow.
Madam Clerk, Alderwoman Tyus, you are recognized.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I appear before you and I listened to the testimony of the primary sponsor of this bill, and he talked to people about speaking to him. Let me first make it very clear, I'm opposed to this bill. I am the person who sponsored, we talk about in this bill, it talks about amending the city code. What we're amending is 2 ordinances. The first ordinance is 65061, introduced by Alderwoman Sharon Tyus, okay? And then there's another ordinance, 65347. I think it's very deceptive when you introduce something speaking to you that you're changing a code, but you don't reference to the actual ordinances that it really is changing. And just a little history. I wish that someone had talked to me about it, because I would have been glad to come to this committee and tell you about why there are such restrictions on vending in the city of St. Louis. And one of them is that we got rid of vending one time when I was been there, I don't know, in the 90s, because we got some criticism from Greg Freeman and Bill McCullum about vending. It was such a horrible ordeal that within several months, we reintroduced and passed it with everybody, I believe, voting for the current ordinance, which is 65061. And what we set up was that if people thought that there should be places in their community that they wanted it, that the alderman could then make their whole ward a vending district or parts of their ward a vending district. I heard the sponsor talk about that you could not vend in parks. That is exactly not correct. If you go to section, just a minute here, 31 of this ordinance I just told you about, there's a specific, okay, going to section 31. And I'm going to send you all this ordinance, and anybody who wants to talk about it and really hear what we went through, since I only have a few minutes, I'm going to share this all with you. In section 31, it says rules and regulation for city park vending districts. So there was always city parks allowing vending districts. So anyone who says that does not is not telling the truth. And when we talked about vending in this ordinance, we actually did define what a vending was, which included trucks. So that's not true. I'm probably the person that's worked the hardest on this. And I heard the alderman from the 14th say, talking to him, but I would think that since I sponsored these bills, that someone would have talked to me and said, well, hey, why was this done this way? But no one has done this. Let me tell you the problems that we had. I heard the alderman from the 14th talk about or speak to the fact about talking to businesses. The problems we had is that there was no, and you guys may not be old enough, in my day, there was Mr. Softy. He came into the neighborhood, ding, 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 he sold ice cream. The Mr. Softies in the day of vending in our communities became people who came in the neighborhoods and sold all kinds of illegal things. It was a mess. We did not have enough police back then to enforce our ordinances about not coming onto residential streets. We will not have it again. This is not well thought out. The procedure that we have is very well thought out. And anybody who thinks that their ward should be enlarged can put their whole ward in it, or they can leave it alone. But to come and try to change a bill that we worked with 28 people, not 14, and got everybody to agree with is not very smart to me. You're not reducing red tape. You're going to add nuisances to places that finally got rid of them. I want for you, Alderman Narayan, to think about short-term rental. And that's what we had when we had vending every place. We actually had fights downtown because people got into fights about where their spot was. You're going to create a problem that you really don't understand what you're doing. I'm totally opposed to this bill, and I absolutely will be submitting a amendment that takes out not only the 11th ward, the 12th ward. I'm almost sure, because Alderwoman from the 13th and I have talked about it, the 13th ward, and there should be other wards that be taken out, because to just come along and not talk to me, but think people should have talked to you, is disrespectful to me. And then tell me I have 3 minutes and not ever speak to the fact that there are ordinances that are passed, that your ordinance that you include in, your ordinance that you are now trying to pass never refers to there are city ordinances that you do not include in this. And the reason why we did this is we did meet with businesses, we met with business districts, we met with people. That's something I never heard the Alderman from the 14th talk about. Did you meet with the people who live in the 12th ward, which used to be the 1st, which used to be the 20th? Did you meet with the people in the 8th ward, which used to be the 20th, which used to be the 10th? Did you meet with the people in the 2nd ward, which used to be the 16th? Because there are people involved, not just businesses. Businesses don't have a right to overrule residents and their quiet enjoyment of their community. You also don't have a right to put people at the prospect of putting businesses out of business. I have one of the few places in North St. Louis that has a pretty good business district on Natural Bridge. We've worked very hard for it. It has way too much fast food for me, but it does have it. And those people have had to invest millions of dollars in bricks and mortar and have to pay rent and mortgages. And, to let somebody park 150 feet or 300 feet from that is unnecessary. So I came to say, I will be sending, I hear you. I will be sending the ordinances to the committee member. I wish I would have had the committee substitute, and I am totally opposed to it, and will be submitting an amendment to take my ward out of it. Thank you.
And it was 5 minutes, Alderwoman Tyus, not 3.
I don't care if it's 20. It wasn't enough that they did not consult with me, and you change an ordinance and I'm sitting right here, but you talk about speaking to the Alderman from the 14th. The Alderman from the 14th should have at least had a conversation with me.
Alderman Browning, are you still on?
I don't see him on.
All right, with that, we will go to public comment. We will do 2 minutes for each person. If we could move everybody over and swear everybody in at once.
We have 3 people with their hand raised, so I just moved them over.
Four, it looks like we have 4.
Oh, we have 4, no.
So everybody who is testifying, if you could please, once Madam Clerk moves you over, if you could turn on your cameras so we can see you, so we can swear you in properly. I can't see you, but I can see you now. All right, if you can all read, please.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to raise my hand. I'm on my mobile device.
Oh, well, first you need to turn on your camera, but literally raise your hand, not your virtual hand, your actual hand. Old school this time, but you can please raise your actual right hand. And
I have one more moving over.
Oh, one more. All right, thank you. And I guess it's going to be a little chaotic, but if you could all unmute and say, do you, and repeat after me, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do. I do.
Great. Thank you. So if you could go back and mute yourselves, and then Madam Clerk will call you by name, and then you'll have 2 minutes to testify.
Amber Cole.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you, Ms.
Yes, Ms. Cole, we can hear you.
Good morning. Again, I spoke on this before. This bill don't have enough substance into it, and I don't believe it's really been thought about to take my quiet enjoyment, which I haven't had in quite some time in O'Fallon Park. We have been fighting, just trying to get some peace in the park, as well as I'm trying, just like my alderperson has spoken before. She said any bill, anything that's don't have no enforcement to it is nothing but literature. And so if you don't have any way to enforce these policies and procedures that was listed the other day is ridiculous. Number two is to have this hearing so quick again instead of waiting. I don't know what's the rush to have this hearing, but you did it. And I believe that the people that's around that park needs to be listened to. Health department was supposed to come in and see if the food trucks and anybody that has a permit is to be regulated. We've been asking that for the longest. No one comes over there. Now they're saying that they're going to have the street department to regulate it. They can't even clean off the streets. So you're going to give them another task to do. Now you're going to do, we also have people that's lined up along West Florissant. No one has monitored that. So if you're going to have all these food trucks, and they're not going to just get, now you're going to eliminate downtown, rather down on the arch. Why? They need to be down there if you're going to have visitors coming. So now you're going to put all this back into the residential area. We don't have the police because the police don't have enough time to come in the parks. They supposed to do tickets and stuff. They don't do that.
Ms. Cole,
The
that's your
march.
time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Jim Dryer.
Ms. Cole.
Do I have to do that? Okay, I'm assuming you can hear me. Is that
Yes, we
correct?
hear you.
All right, thank you. So my name is James Dwyer. I am here once again. I was a participant in the meeting. I testified in the meeting on Monday afternoon, at which time I expressed opposition to the bill in its present form based on two major issues. One having to do with the articulation of rules and regulations that have been fully fleshed out, fully negotiated, and the inclusion of those in the ordinance, not postponing that essential activity to some time in the future and delegating it to some agency that may or may not be able to attend to it in a timely manner. Secondly, there is, as the previous witness just testified, there is no mechanism for enforcement. It is not reasonable to expect the police department to be the enforcement agency for a matter of this sort, and yet it is critical and essential that once rules and regulations are in place, that they be understood by all parties, both vendors and the community, and that there be an efficient, practical means of enforcement. That is pretty straightforward, rather simple. It could easily have been addressed in the time between last September and now, but that when the previous meeting that resulted in substantial negotiations and agreement on important issues happened in September, there was to be another meeting. It did not occur. Now is not the time to push this bill through. Now is the time to allow adequate time for finalizing negotiations and presenting a complete and thorough bill. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Buzz Moore.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me fine? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Buzz Moore. I am a 8-year owner of a food truck in the St. Louis region. I also own a brick and mortar in Tower Grove East. I employ around 15 employees that many of them walk to work. And I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force and also of the Department of Transportation. I'm the secretary of the St. Louis Food Truck Association for the last 5 years. My observation of St. Louis as I travel the world, actually internationally, but in the United States, is that we, St. Louis, are behind the times There are other cities our size in the region, Indianapolis, Memphis, Nashville, that have an active food truck scene that puts people on the streets. They step out from courthouses, from law offices, from downtown business areas, and they have lunch, they have business meetings. We see it romanticized in TV, in movies. St. Louis is lacking that scene. We don't have people on the streets enjoying the downtown areas before sporting events, after hours. Food trucks are a licensed health department operation. They don't sell drugs. They bring hot, warm food to neighborhoods. During COVID, if it wasn't for food trucks, many of the HOAs would have been lacking warm, unique food by award-winning chefs in the region. My business has been featured on the Food Truck Nation on the Food Channel. We've been featured in many of the local magazines, and what we see most is that the food trucks are being unfairly restricted. We pay the same taxes, we pay the same employment taxes, we employ people, and being a person who owns both a brick and mortar and a food truck, I know that a food truck is not going to park itself outside of a brick and mortar and compete with those businesses. Also, when we talk about protecting brick and mortar businesses that are going out, food trucks are often, as in my case, a springboard into a brick and mortar. So successful businesses succeed, failing businesses fail. The downtown St. Louis area needs more people, more attractions, and we need to have the food truck scene similar to other cities.
Mr. Moore, that's your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Katie Har.
And before we move on, I just want to acknowledge we have another Alderwoman Boyd. So if we can move her over, and Alderwoman Boyd, if we could just add you to the end of public testimony, if you don't mind, unless you have a time constraint.
Secretary, I would like to make sure, this is Brian Scott, I would like to make sure that I get added to the list of public testimony, please.
You are, Mr. Scott. Madam Clerk will
Thank
call
you.
your name. She'll call everybody's name, and she'll do the appropriate procedure when it's your turn to testify. I think it's Mr. Wingo's turn, and when Madam Clerk.
Katie is next. I mistakenly took her back over. Yeah.
So she's in charge, but please follow Madam Clerk. Thank you.
Katie, you're free to speak.
Are you right? Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's just making sure. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak again today. I will echo a few comments. Mr. Moore, you just mentioned the vibrancy that a food truck community can bring. I don't disagree with that. I've been in a number of cities where I have also seen a wonderful food truck scene. I do think it brings something. I will say that and I apologize, I'm the executive director for the Central West End North Community Improvement District. It has been a number of years, but I have in fact had food trucks in the past pull up directly in front of some businesses that I've had to ask to move along and not park directly in front of their competition. So it does happen. And my concern, and I just echo some of the concerns that have already been expressed here, and I won't reiterate all them, though, is that we just truly need a process. We need a clear process for establishing the locations. I know that Alderman Aldridge has mentioned that a map would be produced by the streets department. I think it's important that that map be clarified and established before this moves through. I think that we need clarification on the rules and enforcement and some time to have that discussion so that we really can have something that is beneficial to our entire city, both our districts, our city as a whole, our parks. There's an opportunity here, but I think there's a rush going on, and I think it's important that we get it right because there really is an impact to the communities, to the bricks and mortar, and to the parks that really needs to be discussed here before putting it out there and just hoping that those things come together. Because as you can see, there's a lot of conversation still being had here, and that's going to continue even while if this gets moved through. So I ask that you hold on approving this forward. Thank you. I'm sorry, one last comment. Rachel Witt has texted me. She indicated that she's raised her hand and is in the waiting room, but had not been moved over to speak.
Okay, I'll take care of it. Brian Scott.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot that I need to cover on this, but I'm the president of the St. Louis Food Truck Association. I own 2 food trucks. I've also owned a brick and mortar in on the South Grand near Condolet Park. And so there are a lot of things that we've been working on over the last, let's say, 3 years, but most recently in the meetings with Alderman Aldridge, with GSL. And I think that the issue is bigger than most of the people on this call think. The thing that I really want to say is I understand the need to make this a more perfect bill, but I urge you to understand that the time to act is now. There's been a decade of strife with food trucks vending in the city of St. Louis and in other surrounding cities because all the other cities and townships have adopted the St. Louis City Plan. So the time to act is now. This bill will get us to the next step of what we need to do. This is a much larger conversation, but it can't wait for it to be perfect because right now it is extremely imperfect. We can't vend anywhere other than on Market Street, and as my food truck has struggled. You talk about, we mentioned earlier, someone mentioned that brick and mortars are going out of business. Well, food trucks are going out of business left and right as well, and we're business owners as well. We pay taxes on every dollar that we produce. We spend more than
Mr.
I
Scott,
did.
that's your time.
Okay.
David Wingo.
Yes. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm a food truck owner as well, and I'm part of the Food Truck Association. Basically, what I had to say, pretty much Buzz had covered it. But I agree that we are behind other cities, New York, Chicago, a number of other cities. They are really booming with the food trucks, and I think it's bringing in revenue for the city, and it's just an all win-win situation when everybody can get on board. And like Brian said, us as food trucks, we're slowly going out of business, and we need the help of the city because it seems like every event that goes down in St. Louis is useless without the help of the food trucks. It's like when you add food trucks to your venue, it's like it's bringing out more people. And I might have took it in the wrong direction from what the Alderwoman was talking about, food trucks on West Florissant and stuff. In certain places that we probably wouldn't be interested in vending, but we would like to be able to open up parts of downtown. It seemed like we're restricted once we get past Jefferson. And St. Louis need to be able to open up to do better than what we're doing. So like I said, a lot of stuff that was said between Brian and Buzz, we're all in the same food truck association. So I'll cut it short and leave it there, but I agree that we are behind. Thank you.
Mr. James Page.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Page, Executive Director of the St. Louis Downtown Neighborhood Association, and I'm also a 22-plus year resident of downtown St. Louis. Madam Chair and members of the Special Committee on Reducing Red Tape, I'd like to express a few pros and cons of Board Bill 14. First and foremost, I am not against food trucks in the city of St. Louis. As an example, I used to purchase my lunch from food trucks during Food Truck Tuesdays, we used to call them, outside of Square's headquarters on North Tucker. I enthusiastically supported and promoted Food Truck Tuesdays, interviewed patrons, and posted photos of them and their purchases on my Facebook page. I also supported food trucks in other locations, such as outside of the old post office. It was my honor and pleasure to participate in 2 planning meetings regarding food trucks hosted by Greater St. Louis, Inc. in September of 2024. We made some progress by limiting operating hours from 2 a.m. to 11 p.m. We limited food trucks to 100 feet away from the entrances of brick and mortar bars and restaurants. However, we ended the second meeting with the promise of a third planning meeting, which never happened. The proposed Board Bill 14 seeks to expand zones in which food trucks are permitted. However, I'm not aware of any neighborhoods besides downtown and the Central West End that participated in the food truck planning meetings, that is, members of the general public. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, the revenues of the downtown brick and mortar bars and restaurants, especially those on and near Washington Avenue, are balanced on a knife's edge. This was especially true during and after the pandemic and is still true. Why do we want to introduce additional competition from food trucks along Washington Avenue? I asked the Special Committee on Reducing Red Tape to retain Board Bill 14 in committee for opportunities to improve the language of the bill, to add enforcement measures, and consider impacts on all the citizens of the city. As a reminder, as I shared on Monday, haste makes waste. Let's take our time and get this right. Thank you.
Ms. Smith, you're on mute.
Thank you. Avery McDonald. Avery Frank. Jennifer McDonald.
Good morning, Madam Chairs and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer McDonald, and I work for an organization called the Institute for Justice, which has been advocating for entrepreneurs for over 30 years. We've done a lot of work in the courts, in legislatures, in city councils, as well as in the research on food trucks. And so I just want to talk today about some of the barriers that food trucks face and why it's so important to support them. particularly as commercial rents continue to skyrocket and it can be difficult to afford that brick and mortar space. The ability to not only own and operate a food truck, but to do so successfully is really important for some of the city's more vulnerable residents. The research shows that they're incredibly important, particularly for Black and Brown entrepreneurs. And so it is so crucial that the city support these businesses and do everything it can to allow them to operate. I know that there's concern that food trucks unfairly compete with restaurants, and I understand where that concern comes from, but the data simply don't support that argument. Our quantitative study of food trucks and restaurants found that not only do food trucks not unfairly compete or damage the revenues of restaurants, but they actually complement each other because food trucks drive additional foot traffic to neighborhoods. They help keep eyes on the street, which help reduces crime and keeping these neighborhoods really vibrant. And so it's important that the city not put itself in a position where it's picking winners and losers and favoring brick and mortar restaurants over food trucks. Each entrepreneur in St. Louis has the same right to earn an honest living, and they take great pride in doing that. And so we want to make sure that the committee is supporting that. So expanding the areas where they can vend is incredibly important, and we really love that part of this bill. We are concerned that the bill retains a 100-foot ban on food trucks operating within that area between a brick and mortar and a food truck because it's unconstitutional, because like I said, that food trucks don't actually unfairly compete with restaurants and because it's just bad policy. So we would encourage you to do everything you can to support the food trucks, which includes expanding the areas where they can operate, but also includes fully getting rid of that 100-foot proximity ban like the bill originally did when it was introduced last year. So thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Frank Avery Frank, I'm sorry.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Avery Frank. I'm a City of St. Louis resident, but also a policy analyst at the Show Me Institute, which is a free market, nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that looks to advance sensible, well-researched ideas for Missouri and all the cities in Missouri. And I believe that Board Bill 14 is a free market bill that would help make the city of St. Louis a better place to work as a food vendor and a better place to live as a consumer of good food in the city. I do think that this bill, when it was originally introduced, was the strongest version of this bill, but I still do think that the substitute is a good way to cut red tape as this committee is outlined to do and help improve the vibrant food culture, which the city of St. Louis does have. Particularly, I think that there are two key things to look at, which is in the original version of this bill, there was really an allowance for food trucks to operate wherever they can. I think that's really one of the strengths of the bill. Food trucks, the restaurant industry has been changing. The past 15 years, the number of food trucks in the U.S. is over quadrupled. The mobility of being able to move where the demand is one of the strengths of food trucks. And the bill allows them to move more places, not be so restricted as maybe having it for events, but rather having St. Louis is actually a hub for food trucks, brick and mortar places, and just continuing to build on our vibrant food culture. And I do think that the bill as outlined does allow for, if a food truck is acting as a public nuisance, that there are restrictions, there are enforcement opportunities to be able to move those food trucks. And whether those restrictions are pushed all the way back or not, I think that there's room for that to happen. And I also think that I agree with the previous speaker that the original bill did have the removal of the 100-foot minimum. I think that needs to come back. The competition isn't something to be feared. It drives innovation. It provides more options for consumers. It lowers prices for consumers. And brick and mortar restaurants can stand to benefit actually from increased foot traffic, from being able to learn what the best practices are. What are their competitors doing in food trucks that are attracting these customers to them, and letting that shine a light on what the best practices are and help them adopt them in their own businesses. And as for labor shortages, food trucks on average employ only 1.2 employees. They're really self-run, so that's not a concern to really be worried about. And I think that this bill is a good one. I think the original version was more clear and more straightforward, but I do think that this bill will
Mr.
help
Frank,
make
that's your
St. Louis a
time.
better city to work and live. Thank you so much.
That was our last speaker.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, I know the committee wanted to hear from the public before asking any questions. So with that, I will go in order of seniority. I believe that we'll start with Alderman Spencer. Alderman Spencer, do you have any questions for the bill sponsor?
I do, but I'm having an issue
Oh, I
again with
actually
my,
apologize. Hold on. One moment. Alderman Boyd, do you still want to testify?
Yes, ma'am, if I could.
Yes, please. I said the same thing to Alderman Tyus, so please take no offense. I gave her 3 minutes, which ended up being 5. But please
That's
proceed.
okay.
And then we'll open it up to questions from the committee.
And I just had a question. I applaud the people that are here today that do have food trucks. But I guess my question is, what about the areas that have no peddling enforcement in their areas? So how would that impact the food trucks? That's one question. And then the second question is, we have people that have food trucks that come into our community and they don't have licenses. They haven't been inspected by the health department. We have people with trucks, and so we are telling them they can't be here. So how would we look at that, to enforce? I get the part with downtown and how they're trying to broaden that area, but what about those neighborhoods that don't have peddling? And I have certain parts of my neighborhoods, it's a no peddling in our community.
And I can thank you so much, thank you so much, Alderwoman, for being here, for raising those concerns. So currently, the way that the language read in the current ordinance right now, there should not be any food truck in a residential. We wanted to make sure we stay away from allowing food trucks in residential unless, in that section 8, unless like there's a festival. I know the former alderman from the 21st Ward, Collins, used to do food trucks in O'Fallon Park. Unless there's an exception, they're able to talk to the Parks Department or the Streets Department to allow food trucks to operate. But in this legislation, I want to be very critical to not ensure that there are food trucks in commercial districts. I mean, in residential districts. So if that is happening currently, hopefully between the streets and also the Parks Department, if you see that happening, to reach out to the directors. But in this legislation, I am staying away from making sure that food trucks operate in residential areas.
Alderman Boyd, we can't hear you. Alderman Boyd, we can't hear you.
Alderman Boyd.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
Okay, because I've got a bad computer, so be patient with me here. So I thank you for that information. So I guess my other question is, because I like the idea what James Page has said earlier, how they had the food truck Tuesdays and that stuff. And I like that, but I'm just nervous because we have to understand when you do this bill and you said in your bill, and I stand corrected, you said you were getting away from residential. So we can exclude certain areas, correct, to say that we don't want those included in this bill.
It's already, certain areas are already excluded, Alderwoman. In the original food truck bill, I think they was pretty excluded throughout the city. Only where we're saying that they are able to currently operate is in commercial industrial area F through L. So those like downtown, that is Central West End, that is the Grove, that's South Graham, but there is still a requirement that food trucks cannot be 100 feet of a brick and mortar. And there is a map that I can send you, Alderwoman Boyd, of You probably already got it because you've been around longer than I have, of the different zoning areas. So they only able to operate in commercial district. They're restricted from operating in residential districts. They only can operate in those commercial industrial areas, and they can't operate in the WAF. I probably get that wrong. Area which is like between the courthouse and the arch, because there's kind of an agreement and contract that the arch ground has with having that area to have their own individual sell popcorn and lemonade to individuals that go to the arch and visit.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Alderman.
And thank you, Alderwoman Boyd. With that, we will go to the committee. Alderwoman Spencer. All right, we'll come back to Alderwoman Spencer.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Can you see me? I am really
Not see
having an
you.
issue.
You had
Let's
it
see.
on before, so, but we cannot see you at this moment.
I think it's wanting me to blur my background rather than there we go. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I just want to say I love food trucks. I love them so much. Cities I love, and I hope to model St. Louis after Berlin, Mexico City are flourished and full of food trucks. The options of being able to have food trucks, to be able to start a business with a mobile kitchen is absolutely critical to the trajectory of opening up a brick and mortar and having a permanent home. I see the value. I absolutely love to eat from food trucks, and I want to commend the sponsor for introducing the concept. I do have a few points here from former Alderman Page's point that the third meeting never happened is a big source of frustration for me. I'm hearing from members of the community that wanted to participate in working sessions. My legislative aide, who is a former alderman, who isn't that new, hasn't been engaged in the process, hasn't been able to weigh in and weigh constructively through this. I have been hearing from business districts, including Cherokee, Street, Grand, etc., not to mention the issues presented by Alderwoman Keys and others from other business districts, including Grand Center, that just have not been addressed yet. Many members of the community, including Soulard and other neighborhood community members, have not had their concerns addressed or met with this particular bill. Enforcement has not been addressed. That's what, right now we're not seeing enforcement at all, which is why, quite frankly, you see food trucks all over the place, and which in some cases I'm glad about. But as mentioned by the director of the Cherokee Business District, they are having issues they cannot get addressed with food trucks from time to time, even though they love them in the district by and large. So it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And I think there's a lot of details here that haven't been worked out. Having two portals for members of the public seems to me like adding red tape, not to the food trucks, but to the general public. I think that's a real problem. And lastly, I'll say that licensing in general, we know from the public input sessions that we did have last year, and I participated and listened and was grateful for the opportunity here from food truck vendors themselves, that one of the most major issues was licensing. The licensing hurdles involved, having to get your name tags and all this other junkola to get your food truck legal was one of the biggest issues, and that hasn't been addressed here. And I just think that while I appreciate the concept of moving some legislation forward, I think we have a lot more work to do to get this right. And I am just very hesitant to move forward something at the very end of session, the very last possible days to get something done at the cost of getting it done right. And when we're hearing from so many members of the public who just have concerns that could quite frankly be addressed and be worked out, I just think that we're moving too quickly here. And at this point, I cannot support the bill. Thank you for the opportunity here, and I will defer to my colleagues.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Oldenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to start with a quick statement, I certainly would agree with the majority of what Alderwoman Spencer just said with regards to the feeling of rush on this. Food trucks are great. They provide a culinary diversity that our city needs. Want the business to flourish. I think everybody does. That's why we're here. Initially, nothing really offended me in this bill, but as I began to read it a bit more closely and started to hear a lot more from people, I do think it would behoove this committee to hold this bill, work on it, have that last meeting that folks feel like they didn't get a chance to talk on, reset the clock, and come back 30, 60 days with a bill that feels like everyone's voice was heard. And I feel like that's an important step. And speaking of individual voices, I do have a question for the sponsor, if I may, Chairwoman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Alderman from the 14th. Did you mention earlier, maybe in your prologue here, that GSL and the Restaurant Association support this legislation, or that you just had initial conversations with?
No, the Restaurant Association supports it. The executive director was at the Monday meeting. They support this legislation. GSL, originally I was working with Adam and GSL. A lot of this language that came from those meetings that we had was implemented in the piece of this legislation where Adam at the time, who now left GSL and worked for Anheuser, was working with us on this. And then there was kind of a transition. So GSL is not taken a stance because they're catching up to this legislation because their point person was Adam, who no longer is in that role at GSL. But the Restaurant Association was there Monday, and they said they was in full support. And I can try to get see if we can get a statement from the executive director so members of the committee can have that letter.
Shoot that. Alderman, are you opposed to maybe holding this today so that we can all kind of work on it during the break that's coming? I appreciate the need to want to get something done. I know that feeling. I appreciate Mr. Scott's testimony about now is the time to act. We can't wait anymore. But I mean, I think another 30 or 60 days to really ensure that we are in fact communicating and working with everyone, I think that just goes a long way. To have this pass out of committee on maybe a 1-vote margin with the need of the president's appearance just feels like you don't have everybody's buy-in to me, and I think the public will see that reflection. So I'm asking you to see if you want to hold this until we can come back in the next session and pass something that feels like everyone's voice and everyone was heard at the table.
Is that a question, Alderman?
Yeah, if you consider holding the bill, sir.
Yeah, I will respectfully not be willing to hold it. I will be willing to continue to work with my colleagues. Again, this bill was filed back in April. I know we all have been busy, April 26th of 2024. And I'm always willing to, if there are certain concerns or certain points that need to be addressed in the legislation, I'm always willing to make those changes, even willing to maybe add an effective date, which is currently not in the bill, to maybe push it out. So if things do need to get changed in the process, we'll do that. But right now, I think what we have is a good start of the legislation. I do hear a lot of folks' concerns about maybe the enforcement. I believe the enforcement is coming from the streets department and the parks department. We'll talk about or we'll be around like parks and food trucks being there. I think this is a good start of a bill. I don't think there's nothing that's ever going to be perfect. I've tried to bring everybody to the table. If it's maybe one more meeting, since our last meeting Monday, I've reached out to DNA for changes. I've reached out I did talk to Miss, I forget her name, who was on the call from the Central West End who testified. I called the Alderwoman from the 8th who did not attend any of those meetings at all that we were having, and willing to try to get any changes possible to try to make it stronger, either through amendments in committee or on the floor as well. We're working with my colleagues.
I have nothing
You
further,
on mute.
Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
I think she's.
Alderman Ryan goes
Sorry,
first.
I always get them mixed up. I apologize. No slight. Alderman Ryan, I was going back and forth.
No worries. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I don't see the rush here that people are talking about. This bill was filed in March or April. We've been discussing this both as a committee and as a city for even prior to that. This is not a conversation that's happening in a vacuum. And I mean, if we're thinking this is rushed, then there's certainly other board bills that are insanely rushed that were filed a week ago, and we're pushing through committee or attempting to push through committee to get to the floor before the session is over. So the idea, I just want anyone who says that this is rushed to kind of keep that same energy for the new RAM settlement bill, the city manager bill. There are many bills that have been filed in the last couple weeks. This is not one of them. I think that the fact that we're hearing the same concerns repeatedly also means that we've engaged in a pretty robust public conversation about this that seems to be on some of the bigger bills where we know that we've done a good job engaging the community when you're hearing the same 2 or 3 concerns repeatedly, because then that's when you look to address those concerns either in committee or on the floor. And we still have several weeks to before this bill would become finalized. So at this point, I'm supportive of this. Sometimes you got to take some risks, and we can always come back and tweak things. I'm a big proponent of the idea that legislation is never actually complete. Sometimes you got to take a gamble, and when we're changing something big, as long as there's a willingness to come back to the table and fix anything that breaks, I think, and I know that the sponsor is willing to do that. I think that this is something that we should be moving forward on. And with that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Alder Lady Clark Hubbard.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I do have, at the end, I have a few questions, but I do want to reference a few things. I'm sorry. As the, what I talk about always down here, how we represent the communities. We're down here all in the same position with the same authority to advocate on behalf of. So in the 10th ward, I'll say, one, I give a plug to Mr. Wingo. His food truck is amazing. He's my neighbor in 10th ward resident. And so him being on here today has elevated some things to me that I hadn't heard yet from a constituent. Now I'll speak to my districts. And again, also recognizing that the 10th ward isn't directly impacted, but we are through association and through how we advocate again for businesses. The Makers District in the 10th ward just enjoyed an amazing event last year in October, Delish on Delmore. If you know the different restaurants, Ben Perum and all the different restaurants beyond Sweet that have opened up and are thriving, Steve's Hot Dogs, the Fountain, the brewery, all of these restaurants that are thriving over there. We had an event called Delish on Delmore, which incorporated food trucks, vendors, and them in the same stretch, in the same night, and it was amazing. It went off without a hitch, and it proved, I think, to some of the data and stats that were referenced here today, that they can balance each other out, right, on the ground. And then, of course, the Loop. We do events there as well. We have other great neighborhood organizations that when they do events, they don't want to have a hindrance of not being able to take advantage of the food truck scene. And so for me, some of the conversation that's been had today, I think pits them against each other, which isn't fair. And I wanted to reflect that I've seen the balance in it. That I've seen that it can be an and, not a or. But I do understand and respect the lived experiences that were reflected here today by some of my assistants in service and by some of the constituents in the community. So in the work and the effort that will continue to go here, I want to be clear that I will respect my colleagues and their amendments if they so choose to move forward on this, because again, they have the responsibility, like we have the responsibility all to be down here to advocate on behalf of our constituents. I will quickly, and I know it's been touched on, not just today, but in other committee hearings, but I want it for the record again, because you can't say things enough, especially when they're the truth and they're factual, because they can get drowned out by misinformation and cause confusion. So for the sponsor, I do have a couple of questions if he will yield.
Yes, ma'am, I yield.
Okay. The written permission stance is something that I've heard from one of my districts. Can you just speak briefly or factually about the written permission of having a food truck vend within the feet distance from a brick and mortar?
Yes, ma'am. So currently, right now in the legislation, no food truck can vend right outside of a restaurant. And I don't think I'll just stick to that. They can't vend outside a restaurant, and there's a 100-foot radius to the restaurant and the food truck. If a restaurant is closed during business hours, only way a food truck could still, even as they close, only way a food truck could pull up outside of a closed restaurant is they would have to have written permission from that restaurant to be able to do that.
Written permission from that restaurant. I want to be clear on people so that they know it's not overstepping any brick and mortar. Again, I understand the need to protect both entities as a whole. So the written permission, I think, could come from no one better than the brick and mortar owner. So thank you for that. And then be it the portal or us or the streets department or who, can you just also once again clarify who will manage the complaints and then carry out the accountability of the complaints?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So the portal, there will be a portal that the streets department have that will kind of really be the enforcement agency. And, you know, we tried to figure out who would be best to be the enforcement agency. We didn't want to bring in a new department to be the enforcement because right now there's already relationships established with food trucks in the streets department. So once they get licensees and they go through every different department, they work with the streets department on a regular basis to know where they can vend, where they can't vend, and they build those relationships. So the portal that the streets department has committed to creating, which I said literally they could be able to create in one day, is there will be a section in that portal where individuals, community or alders or whoever can be able to make compliments, complaints, but that would be the revocation system right there for individuals to say, hey, this food truck, you know, is in an area where they shouldn't be operating, or we've seen that this food truck did something good or did something bad. But in that portal, there will be a system where people can make complaints or compliments or just comments in that portal to address any concerns they may have with the streets department, who will have the ability to reach out to the food truck. They have a list of all the actual licensed food trucks. And I think this will also be a benefit because there are some food trucks that aren't licensed, which put a hindrance on, I know Brian and others who are paying that hard money to make sure that they're licensed. So the ones that aren't licensed, you know, if there's right now, there's no process for people to kind of make that complaint. So we really trying to put some teeth around making sure that the good food trucks are continuing to operate in a good way and working with businesses. And the ones that ain't, you know, how do we get them licensed? But the streets department will have that portal to make complaints, comments, or anything like that.
Okay. All right. But thank you so much again for that additional clarity. Again, my stance is here from the examples I said clearly that I see the benefit in both and us working together and finding a balance in both of them. Even because I have some, I can think offhand, Vale's brothers, they have the food truck and the brick and mortar, right? In the 10th ward that they reflect being able to work and complement each other, which I think was shared today. So I do share some of the concerns that have been stated, but I think that we do and will have the time. I appreciate you. I said that, shared that with you via text and sharing it with you now that, look, I hear them, but I also know that even the one concession that you just spoke to that I hope you will work on, the effective date may give some comfort to some of the people that might have still some pause on this, making us be able to move forward on this legislation. So again, thank you. I'll continue to listen, but I think I want to make sure right now I would be in support of you.
Thank you. And thank you for the conversation beforehand, Alderwoman, just making sure if there was any concerns that you have. I always want to never make sure my colleagues are caught off guard. So I appreciate your ongoing communication.
Thank you, Alder Lady Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to begin again by saying, got nothing against food trucks. Vale's family was my neighbor, literally 2 doors down, and I worked with their children and in fact, their grandmother lived on my same block. We in the 11th Ward, particularly around our parks, have a different situation, which is part of the reason why I reached out to have that discussion with the sponsor, and I have removed my name as a sponsor because, again, I didn't feel like there was a real conversation there. It's like I'm doing what I'm doing. But that being said, and as we move on, when it comes to the 11th Ward, particularly around my parks, we have had a myriad of issues as the parks director, the police department, the fire department, and other entities can attest to. That is my concern, that the people who live on the perimeter of all of our parks, across the street from every one of my parks, there are houses with real live people living in those houses who should be able to enjoy their life and liberty of being able to own their home, live there quietly and comfortably. Not to mention the level of trash. There is no enforcement. There has not been any enforcement. We have asked for enforcement. We continue to ask for enforcement within the perimeters of our parks. And so again, I'm not against food trucks. You know, everybody knows somebody who owns a food truck. I'm currently working with a 14-year-old entrepreneur in my ward who's trying to one day have a food truck. But this thing is not fleshed out in a way that provides that communication with our community and law enforcement and other agencies that should be regulating as well as enforcing the mandates as stated in this bill. And so for that reason, I will not be supporting this.
Thank you, Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Sonier.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I want to apologize first if you hear some music in my background. I had office hours scheduled before we had this meeting, but definitely happy to be here. My constituents certainly understand. I just, wanted to start by just commending the sponsor for starting the conversation and bringing this up. Food trucks are something that have been a topic of a lot of discussion. I actually represent the Cherokee Community Improvement District, and we've had a lot of conversations recently, especially at some of their board meetings and with the election of new officers, about what does it look like for food trucks to have a place here without it taking away from business of the restaurants. And we've actually had a lot of conversations about the ways that food trucks can operate and be complementary of them. I really appreciate, I know I had conversations with you, Alderman, and really asked that there do be some sort of distance requirement in terms of restaurants to food trucks, because that was something that many of the folks, a few of them that are part of the South Grand did, and a few of them that are part of the Cherokee Community Improvement District did speak to that would make them comfortable with it. And so I appreciate some of the changes that I see in the committee substitute. It seems like you've incorporated the feedback. I do have a few questions, some of which I want to ask for clarity that I've gotten from some of them who are concerned. Could you just clarify first and foremost who is over the food truck process, and has your bill changed that at all?
No, ma'am, we haven't changed the process. So if a food truck, this bill is mainly focusing on the operations, not the licensees. So if a food truck want to operate. They have to go through several departments and agencies within the city just to get a license. The streets department is the individuals who operate, who are over kind of the food trucks. I want to say over, but regulate them. So when we talk about who's enforcement, we're not changing the enforcement of individuals who already enforce and can take away the ability for food trucks to be able to operate. We are putting in a process where now the community can be able to, within the portal, make comments and complaints if a food truck isn't operating properly to be able to hold them accountable.
And you talked about the complaint process. To folks who are concerned about a lack of enforcement for complaints and a lack of response, can you just share what some of your communication has been like from the time that those complaints are submitted to the follow-up? What department does that look like? Is there timelines discussed for response to complaints? Because I think that's also been a concern of some of the folks who I've spoken with.
Yeah, right now there's actually not a process for residents or communities to have or to make a complaint. What we're doing is setting up that process. You know, in my little short time of being at the board, a year and a half, you know, I've been able to work with the Parks Department and mainly the Streets Department, Commissioner Hagelman, who was at the table at these meetings, who made sure that the language was drafted in the way so that they will actually have the manpower and staff to be able to continue to do what they already do when it comes to the streets department and parks. And our director, Ms. Bethany, but currently there's no process. We're trying to establish that process, and both departments are committed and willing to be able to make sure that that portal is set up and comments and complaints will be able to be addressed if residents do leave comments that a food truck was doing something right or doing something wrong.
Thank you. And in terms of your distance requirement, just yesterday I actually did a walkthrough with a few of the business owners in the Cherokee area and trying to look at the relationship between the 100 feet distance requirement and the restaurants. When you've worked on this legislation, what is your opinion on how that food distance requirement will impact many of the, improvement districts that we have in the community?
Yes, and I want to clarify as far as I know this is getting some confusion between improvement districts and zoning. So we're not doing anything with improvement districts. We are touching the zoning, which would be commercial areas. And when you look on just like Wash Ave, if you drive down Wash Ave, you know that there's a restaurant, there's another restaurant, there's multiple, and which is great. We want these multiple brick and mortars kind of on the strip. So it would not be easy, honestly, still, even with this 100 feet. And I know that was some things that people didn't want no distance at all because they see how it works in other cities, but trying to make sure we get to a medium happy, and maybe somewhere down the line, maybe there is no feet distance. I also heard the concerns of brick and mortars. There need to be some type of distance. So even with these stretches of streets like in your area in Cherokee, you have multiple restaurants just among kind of the on the further end up kind of where the Mexican restaurants are. And then there are even more restaurants further down. A food truck cannot be able to park 100 feet within that restaurant distance. And in some more dense area like downtown or the Grove, it makes it almost even really harder to be able to park in 100 feet because there are so many restaurants just going down those streets. So it's still not a close radius to brick and mortars. And I know food trucks would not like that kind of restriction, even though they wouldn't just pull up and outside of a restaurant that's selling the same thing. But there is still a distance between brick and mortars and an actual food truck that cannot park within 100 feet of any brick and mortar restaurant, even if they closed. They can't do that unless there is written permission.
And as far as the permitting process, can you describe the process a bit for food trucks right now? And is your legislation attempting to change the permitting process?
No, ma'am. So the permitting process is completely different from the operation. For a food truck to get a food truck, as I mentioned earlier, they have to get several licenses. They have to first they got to go to City Hall to get their business license. And when they get their business license for each employee, they got to get these little hang tags, which they got to pay for those hang tags for each employee. Then they have to go to the health department because they sell food just like a brick and mortar. They have to get their health license, kind of common. Then they have to get a fire suppression, I think, approval from like the fire department. Then they have to go to the streets department and get a license. And honestly, what they found out is once they get their license from the street department, there's not many spots for them to operate. So I think that's probably the highest. I think they pay $500 just for their street within the streets department to just find out that they can't operate in various spots of the city, if not almost nearly anyone. And like Mr. Byron said, it's really on the map. You see, like really at Market where City Gardens is where they technically are supposed to operate. And we're making sure that the streets department actually update the map annually because the map actually hasn't even been updated from when the previous ordinance was or the previous chapter was amended.
And I also want to clarify, there are some parks that have their own ordinances or, you know, because of this legislation may be interested in having their own ordinances. How does your bill, like Soulard might be a good example, they have their own ordinances. How does your bill impact parks with ordinances already in place?
If those ordinances are already in place, like Soulard that you bring up, Soulard exempt from this. So a food truck cannot pull up outside of Soulard Market, and I've never seen them pull up outside Soulard Market, but maybe they have, but they can't pull up outside Soulard Market and just start selling because certain parks and certain areas like the WIF district, like Soulard, already have restrictions in place where they cannot be able to vend in those areas. When it comes to the actual park, you know, if the alderwoman from like the 11th, I'm willing to work with her to figure out what language is needed so this doesn't negatively impact her park. But I also know that if once this portal is set up and if maybe an effective date needs to be put into the legislation where it's drawn out so conversations can be had with parks, I know that Commissioner Hagelman would definitely be willing to make sure that if alders are concerned about a certain park not being part of that list, that I'm pretty sure she'll be committed to make sure that that is not part of that list for where they could be able to vend once we get to a place where they are able to vend in parks because they cannot. I know that was brought up earlier. They cannot vend in any parks. That's why the director of parks was there to make sure we get the language right so that they can be able to vend.
Thank you. This is my last question. So if this were to pass, a food truck does end up operating and violating the 100 feet distance, what is the revocation process and, you know, what are the enforcement mechanisms that are in place?
So the revocation process is that if they are in a 100-foot radius, again, there's a portal that will be set up. I think people, you probably don't see the penalties in Ms. Milberg from the mayor's office, who have also been at the table on this. You probably don't see the penalties in this bill because when you go to chapter 8, and she talked about it, there's already penalties in place if food trucks end up violating certain things that they shouldn't be violating. There's fines in place to potentially losing their licensees. So there are penalties and fines if they do not comply with this ordinance. If they are parked outside of a brick and mortar, if they are not in that 100 feet radius, there are ways for them to be held accountable. And if you go to chapter 8 within our zoning code and you go further down, you'll see the penalties that they potentially can get. Only reason we didn't put that in the bill is because those penalties are already stated in chapter 8 and we're not amending those penalties. So we didn't need to put it in the bill and didn't want to put in the bill in chapter 8. You have those same penalties in two places of our muni code.
Thank you. That really is the extent of my questions. I will say, like, I have received a lot of outreach of concern, and I've let folks know about our hearings. I've sent them the YouTube videos. I made sure that I showed up today to ask their questions. I do think there are, you know, as many of our colleagues mentioned today, there are a lot of restaurants that are still struggling to recover and, you know, that are working hard to keep their doors open. And so, you know, I would encourage you to really look at your effective date and whatever else you can do to kind of show our colleagues that you're open to conversation. And at the same time, I do understand that you did file this legislation a year ago. I do understand that you and I have had probably about 4 or 5 conversations. I know I've even been able to connect you with business owners when they've been concerned and you've been, you know, very responsive to them. So I do understand that on your end, you probably, you know, you've done a lot of what a bill sponsor is supposed to do. But I would encourage, just in lieu of many of the concerns that our colleagues have expressed, whatever you can do as far as the effective date to create room for them to figure out more of how their specific communities can really work with this legislation. I would encourage that. And thank you again for your work.
Absolutely. And like I say, currently there's you know, there's not an effective date. It would just be kind of how bills once it's passed at the board and the mayor. But like I said, I'm committed to putting an effective date in the legislation because I do hear people concerns and I'm not trying to neglect them. I want to make sure that all concerns as much as possible is addressed and willing to continue to work with colleagues as this process moves throughout the Board of Alderman.
That concludes my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderwoman Sanier. Madam President?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. First, I wanted to just thank Alderman Aldridge for his work on this over the last year. Personally, I feel like we are in a good place. I think as we heard from the testimony today, regardless of what side you are on with this, I don't think anybody is 100% happy, right? Nobody got 100% of what they want. And I think that is the spirit of compromise. I think this does move us in the right direction. I think it holds our city back when we have so many restrictions on small businesses that it makes it difficult for them to operate, especially when we're talking about a business that typically incubates in a food truck before being able to afford to move into a brick and mortar. And like the alderwoman from the 10th has said, I have witnessed over the years the ability of business districts and food trucks to kind of work in collaboration and work off of each other. And I don't think it needs to be an either or. I think it's an and. We've had a lot of talk at this board in recent months about how to better activate downtown and bring more people into downtown. And I think that this is a way to do that. When there are more eyes on the street, because there are more businesses, that enhances safety, that enhances a sense of community. And this puts us a step closer to being closer to how other similar sized cities regulate their food trucks, although this ordinance would still have us be more stringent than a lot of similar sized city. But I think we're moving in the right direction. And I, just wanted to applaud the alderman for his work. And this will be second read on Friday, should it pass out of committee, which does give some time for additional conversations and amendments if necessary between now and when the bill is perfected. So I think that conversation doesn't stop here today, but it continues us on a path for making it a little bit easier for some of our small businesses to operate in the city, and recognizes that this doesn't need to be an either or, that we can strike a balance to make sure that we can liven up our city and create more vibrancy and more feet on the streets through things like food trucks. So thank you, Alderman, from the 14th.
Thank you, Madam President. I think I have everybody on the committee. I just say that again.
Alderwoman Clark, hand is up.
Alderman Clark Hubbard, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'll be very brief. I know we are still probably on the time thing, but I wanted to uplift again. I'm glad about this process and being able to hear from the community, because one of the things that I promised I would share publicly here is that one of my constituents, Ms. Stigers, recommended in this new process, again, in the work that they do on Delmar, a video, right? There's operations, but I did want to uplift it publicly, have it on the record, operations, through operations and through maybe not specifically through the legislation, but if it moves forward, that food trucks have somewhere where they can go and get clear understanding on this process, what it looks like, be it a YouTube video, be it something like that. I know we've done those here recently with CDA, and they've been very effective. And then my heart still goes out hearing again from my colleague in the 11th, the elevated 11th, and Ms. Cole about the enforcement and the capability, rather the capacity for enforcement. We know that doesn't come through this legislation, through us for that matter, and through the health department. But what I do know is that Dr. Mahdi is fully committed. And even if she hasn't, if it has or hasn't been fully brought to her attention about this space now that we created, I think will. And I look to her to improve on that whether it be in there or not, because again, I stated that I would support my colleagues in their amendments. But either way, moving forward, I think that she will want to hear this because we know her commitment to the city and to the betterment of the health department services. So I just wanted to elevate and capture both of those two things for the public record. Thank you.
Thank you, older lady. So with that, I just want to conclude as well before I pass it on to the bill sponsor to close. I want to echo, I want to thank the older lady from the 10th for elevating the elevated 11th. I know Alderman Keys, we had a brief exchange about some of the questions that you had and concerns, more concerns than questions. And you know, I said then, and I continue to say, I'm happy to help be a conduit and you know, whatever we need to do to make this work for the ward as well as, you know, the whole city. I think that there's something to consider there, that while we each have our wards, we have a city to consider. And I want to steal one of Alderman Narayan's sort of favorite philosophies, is that if nobody's happy, then we've probably done something right. And I feel like this is one of those bills where nobody is totally happy, which means I think that we are onto something. I do also want to point out for the record that we have had 3 hearings on this since the sponsor filed the bill in April. So I think that we have had some robust discussion. As we know, it doesn't mean that that robust discussion won't continue. But we have done that, and I would encourage, I think hopefully this committee will continue on next session. So I'd encourage my colleagues to continue to engage and perhaps engage a little more in the process next session if this bill comes up. Or I know that there are also some other kind of adjacent issues that we discussed this session, like the issue of licenses, which was a little bit too gnarly to get into this session to really come with a solution. But there are some pieces that I think this legislation touches on with red tape that are part of just the bureaucracy issues that we need to address, that are simply part of the things that we need to look at as a whole that aren't totally in this bill. But I think, as my colleagues have mentioned, when you make big changes, not everybody's going to be happy. But I think that we have looked and considered a lot of the things here. And obviously, even though if it gets out of committee today, the discussion will only continue with more voices. So with that, I do want to thank the alderman for the bill sponsor for continuing to move this forward. Again, I know that if nobody's happy, maybe we're onto something. And I think that's what we've done here. So with that, I don't have anything else to add, and you are recognized to close, Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. One, I want to thank this committee and members on the committee. Like I say, when this bill was filed a year ago, a lot of you all, I remember the alderman from the 4th probably thought I was crazy when I tried to take away the distance requirement. He was like, that's a no starter. And, you know, I appreciate each person on this committee that I talked to and have worked with to try to figure out where is a happy medium and what are some changes that need to be implemented that will not just be good for the city, but we also know each ward is different. So I am committed, and I want to be very clear, as the president says, this moves just to second reading. That would be, we won't, you know, debate it to another week. I'm committed to continuing to talk to my colleagues, willing to entertain any amendments or put it in a floor substitute so it can show compromise. But I'm not hearing the concerns from my colleagues, but also not hearing the concerns from people in the community that, you know, want to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's. I know several of the folks that spoke today, I'm gonna continue to reach out to, if it's in the downtown neighborhood area, or if it's in the Central West End, or if it's north or south, wherever it is, to make sure that if you do have issues or you can see some changes potentially, please reach out to my office or reach out to me via email, and I'll be willing to have those conversations to figure out how we can continue during this process to address all those potential changes. I'm also excited that I think we are taking a step forward, and I appreciate the individuals that actually was at the round table that we had. Definitely wish I heard the concern of wanting to have a third one. There was a little bit of a transition, but since we didn't have a third one, I will make sure that I reach out to those folks that was at that round table to make sure that, again, any changes that is necessary and needed happens. But I think this is a good start. The current ordinance that is in place makes it very hard for our food truck operators to be able to operate. it makes it very hard for them to even get to a place where they can get a brick and mortar. Like individuals from the Institute of Justice said, a lot of food trucks, mainly Black and brown individuals that have food trucks, it's a benefit to be able to have a food truck and then go into a brick and mortar. I'm hoping that with these conversations, even have the restaurant association supporting this, that represent restaurants, saying they support this, start to kind of break down this, I don't want to say infighting, but that it has to be a food truck or a brick and mortar. I think there's ways that we all can work together and we all can benefit off each other. And I'm just appreciative of all the robust conversation, all the ability to meet with folks to try to make as many necessary changes, and still going to be committed to doing that. So with that, Alderwoman from the 6th, I would just ask the committee for a due pass recommendation, understanding that there will be continuous conversation on this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Alderman Aldridge. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
We need
a vote.
Sorry, we need it.
To split the second and
I need a motion to move for a due pass recommendation.
I move that we pass Board Bill 14 as amended out of committee with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
Now, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Spencer,
No.
Vice Chair Oldenburg,
Nope.
Alderman Ryan,
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard. I'm sorry, Ms. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys,
No.
Alderwoman Sanye,
Aye.
Chair Velazquez,
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
You have 5 aye votes, 3 no votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I know this must have felt like a HUD's meeting with timing and the with that, Alderman Aldridge, Board Bill 114 as amended is passed out of committee. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I also enjoy them long HUD's meeting because that's where the work happens. That's all, it happens in all the committees, but I would enjoy being on HUD's. Thank you.
It's got the HUD's vibes today. HUD's vibes with a Z. All right, I'm going to stop now. All right, so with that, Madam Clerk, do we have any written testimony for?
Yes, we have 4 in support, 3 in opposition.
Okay, great. Thank you for acknowledging that, making sure that's in the drive. We have no resolutions to review, correct?
We have none.
Are there any announcements? Any committee members have any announcements? All right, and I believe everyone was here, Madam Clerk?
Yes, everyone was here.
Great, no one to excuse. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you all.